final thoughts here by Jack Andy. Sorry.
I played Raiden today. It was a good game.
Shoot the Core Cast.
Welcome to Shoot the Corecast, the official companion podcast to the RF Generation Shmup Club. This is a family-friendly shmup-themed podcast that rocks you like a hurricane. I'm Addicted, also known as Addicted to Shmups, and as always I have
MetalFRO, also known as Game Boy Guru. And if you would like to connect with the podcast, there are a number of ways to do that. You can follow us on Twitter at ShootCoreCast. You can also follow me directly at Game Boy Guru. Check out our Linktree page for links to all of our various feeds and social media, other places. That is linktr.ee/shootthecorecast. Join us at rfgeneration.com for a Shmup Club playthrough and check out the forum there. Please subscribe, rate, like, review, etc. The podcast on your preferred platform. You can also join the RF Generation Discord, which is linked from the front page of rfgeneration.com, and check out the dedicated Shoot the Corecast topic, where we post strats and screenshots or photos of our high scores, talk about shmups in general, and talk about the new episodes. You can also follow me on Twitch and watch me stream the Shmup Club Game of the Month. That is twitch.tv/GuruGameBoy.
I think you should open up a secondary channel called the Parrot Dog Pirate.
Parrot Dog Pirate. Well, I'd have to get an eye patch and a hat or something.
Oh, I'm sure we could get you an eye patch and a hat or something, yeah. No, maybe a hat that... Well, you need a hat, an eye patch, and then you need a button that says, "Ask me about Loom." I think with that you'd be set.
Yeah, just don't ask me to get a peg leg, because that's a bridge too far.
No. Alright, so I wanted to mention real quickly rfgeneration.com. If you haven't been, it's a good place to catalog your collection. There's several things that you're not going to find in other databases. I know I was having trouble when I was trying to add in the Brazilian copy of Deep Space Waifu. And I just couldn't find any other database, and RF Generation had it. Or even when I was looking at the Game Boy Color version of Parrot Dog, I didn't realize I already had about 12 copies of it. So being able to know what you have so you don't buy it again is good, and the more you know.
Not to mention that the RF Generation database has an entry for every variant of every version of the game that includes Tex-Mexium. So you can't go wrong with that.
Oh, that's always a great thing on there. Never forget the Tex-Mexium.
Yep.
Alright, let's talk about the question of the month. This month's question was, what is a game that you know isn't very original and copies mechanics and design from other games but just does it so well? Our first response comes to us from @CoreGamerTreff. So many indie games that we like do this perfectly. For starters, Rival Megagun, Xenocrisis, and Blazing Chrome. Yeah, I think that the indie shmup does a lot of homages to certain things, and in some ways refines it and does it, as we talked about here, does it better. I would think that Xenocrisis arguably does it better than Smash TV, although Smash TV has a wonderful catchphrase.
Big money, big prizes, yeah. I love it.
And Blazing Chrome in some ways could be considered better than Contra 3 in some ways. It doesn't have any of those overhead levels, at least that I can remember.
Hmm.
And Rival Megagun sounds nice, but could you imagine trying to play like Versus Gradius on the Super Nintendo? Slow down.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of neat things that can come with this, and I'm glad that people are trying out new ideas or copying existing mechanics and trying them out in new games.
Right. At CollectorCast says, Demon Attack. Space Invaders got the ball rolling, but I'd rather play Demon Attack. I'm kind of with you there. I generally would rather play Demon Attack, although I do think they're different enough from one another that you can still kind of see the uniqueness in each one.
Well, the cover art certainly is unique.
Yes.
And always will be iconic.
Yes.
Alright, our next comment comes to us from @FiresharkMD, also known as Corkman. Crisis Wing. He copies Tatsujin O, but I can get at least somewhere in it without getting destroyed quickly. Very true, very true. Crisis Wing is, I'm hoping, one that we can maybe do next year, because I think there's a physical coming out next year.
Yeah, there is. Who is it? I think it's Video Games New York is going to be handling that one.
Because they handle the offshoots from East Asia Soft, right? They're like the American publisher for East Asia Soft.
No, I think they're doing the North American publishing for Pixel Heart, aren't they? On some of that stuff.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's getting confusing.
Yeah.
The only one that I know for certain isn't publishing anything is our favorite Dispatch Games.
Oh, don't get me started.
The rest, I get confused.
Yeah, well, that was $200 down the drain.
I should start just calling them distressed games. Distressed or distressed games.
Yeah.
Alright, well, sorry to end on a down note there. What's the next one?
At SPM_NSW says, Super Hydora. Heavily influenced by the classics and really well done. I wish it had an endgame bonus for lives remaining to avoid CP milking, but alas, still a great survival shmup. Yeah.
Yeah, Super Hydora is, that's another good one I want to cover. We got the Switch version that's coming out.
Yep.
Well, the Switch physical, I should say. The PS4 physical's been out for a while. And then they sort of had the prequel, right? Just the regular Hydora, which I think is free on this website.
Yeah, the original Hydora release is free, and then Super Hydora is essentially the same game, but with some additional content.
Sounds good to me. We'll definitely try and get to it before 2025 or before most people can get a PlayStation 5, whatever comes first. All right, our next one comes to us from @STG Shmups. The answer is in your summer game of choice, Raiden. Raiden does nothing original. Well, okay, I'll grant you a toothpaste laser, but it became the smash hit of arcade shmups in the era. Yeah, Raiden is something we'll talk about earlier, but Raiden is, by its wholesome, it's not anything striking, but it is very solid. And is something that would be the culmination of what we had seen throughout the mid to late 80s. They're right before the pivotal change in arcades came in 1991 with Street Fighter II. But we'll talk more about that later.
Yeah. At Quelloid Suave, in replying to STG Shmup, says, I find Raiden super original, actually. Which I thought was an interesting statement, and definitely something that we'll have to break down as we talk about the game.
Yeah, I mean, I do like Super Raiden, but I don't think that's what it means in the context there.
All right.
Red Book Audio does not make something original, unfortunately.
True.
Speaking of Raiden, our next comment comes to us from @WLTR3565. Raiden 1 comes into mind, though probably just my bias as a Topolon fanboy. Hey, there's nothing wrong with being a Topolon fanboy. You know, I have to say with some of the originality too, I think probably stems from the people walking along with stage 1 with the cows and people walking along. It certainly has a little bit of a living, breathing world that you get. It's not, and we'll talk about the Micronic sport later, but it doesn't feel like 1942 where everything just felt desolate and devoid of life. There is some activity going on.
Right. At Skaushmalosh says, after playing a lot of Hishosame and then jumping into Raiden, I'd agree with you. It feels like Toaplan, but 2 games on from Hishosame if they continued on with similar mechanics, if that makes sense. And yeah, I think it does make sense.
Our next comment comes to us from Last Emperor Jub. Blazing Chrome is my favorite Contra game. Androdunas 2? It looks familiar, but has really fun core gameplay. Yeah, I think that if Raiden was the most requested, probably Androdunas 2 would be runner-up. And that's another title that I definitely want to get to sometime soon.
Yep. At Pony Tatsugen says, very obvious question here. Kamui, taking the lock-on system from Rayforce while also using the Lightning Strike from Raystorm, but adding a few little tweaks to make it an extremely fun bullet hell that I like testing new controllers with. Yeah, I'm not sure I would classify Kamui as bullet hell, but it certainly has its moments.
I could see how you could certainly break controllers with Kamui, though. Our next comment comes to us from @BigCore_Mark II, responding to Pony Tatsugen. I second Kamui, but man, did I love how dynamic the stages were. I played it with zero expectations and was blown away at what the developers tried and succeeded in doing. The STG I loved, that you could pick up your weapon from the start of the level and use it to your taste, but clearly saw how some weapons were just superior in any given moment. More balance would have been nice, but it seemed that no other developer pursues that style of play. Or maybe Strike Gunner as was localized in the USA.
Yeah, Strike Gunner STG, I don't know. That one I've never really got on with.
No, there's some things that just don't gel with me, no matter how much other people seem to love them. That's okay.
Yeah. At Need New Shorts says, Gunneck. It's basically Xevious, but so much better.
Yeah, I think that probably Compile would be a second or third, depending upon if we were doing a rank list, or maybe Gradius at the top. For amount of times the system's been copied. In Gunneck or the Compile system has definitely been used quite a bit, even by themselves as being cloned.
Yeah.
So our next comment comes to us from @Cephalopod1. 1 million Gradius clones enter the chat. Yes, indeed. We were just talking about Super Hydora there, and even my pick for this is a Gradius or Gladius clone.
At Real Lord Dalek says, Wild Guns. Barring that, Metal Slug.
Yeah, I think Wild Guns probably did the gameplay the best, where you get from the start. There was 2 arcade games that did this, right? There was Kadash, which is the most widely known one, and then there was, I think it's not Wild Blood, or what's it called? It's made by the same team who did it. It's a Western themed one.
Oh.
They did 2 of them.
Yeah, I can't think of...
Kadash is the most known one. Wait, I don't think Call Cabal, sorry.
Oh, yes, Cabal, yes.
The other C game.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, Cabal is the one that came out on the Nintendo as well, so that was... Let's see here, what the heck was the... I know it's going to come to me as I'm thinking about this here. Blood Brothers, that's it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Blood Brothers is should be made by the same people.
Gotcha.
There, you fire that up in MAME. All right. Yep. And I guess in some ways you could sort of get it along the lines of the Operation Wolf type games, Operation Thunderbolt, and let's see, there was a couple of Rambo games that played out that way. And then there was Dynamite Duke, I think it was. It came to the Genesis. That was an arcade conversion that was that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of games. But I think most people are familiar with Cabal. And then, of course, Wild Guns.
Yep.
Our last comment comes to us from @VenuShmup. I think Rival Megagun is super original, even compared to Twinkle Star Sprites. Yeah, Twinkle Star Sprites may have done it first, but a lot of people seem to really love Rival Megagun.
Yeah.
One of the things that we should try out.
Yeah, it's one of those that I have kind of slept on. And so at some point I definitely need to check that one out.
Isn't there one more than just Twinkle Star Sprites where there's sort of like competitive shmup? I swear there was one on the Neo Geo that maybe I'm missing. Maybe I'm wrong.
I'm not aware of another one on the Neo Geo besides Twinkle Star Sprites.
I could be wrong, and I'm on my fourth cup of coffee right now to stay awake, so anything's possible.
Yeah, there's what's it called? There's another one that's sort of a one-on-one, almost like a shmup fighting game. Gosh, now I'm gonna forget what it is.
But it's not for the Neo Geo, it's a PC or something like that?
No, it's an old arcade shmup. And like I said, it's sort of like a fighting game where you've got one player at the bottom, one player at the top, and you're shooting at each other, and there are other enemies or debris or different things. Change Airblade, that was the name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but unlike Twinkle Star Sprites or Rival Megagun, you don't have one player on the left and one player on the right in a sort of head-to-head Puyo Puyo kind of look. It's more direct head-to-head where you're top and bottom and you're shooting at each other, kind of like the bonus stages, a vertical version of the bonus areas or head-to-head areas in Atomic Robo Kid.
With all the... Speaking of that wouldn't be a bad idea. It seems like a lot of the ideas are just little spins or little iterations upon the mechanics. How about what it would be neat to see a shmup version of... think of versus Pac-Man in the way that they sort of turned that onto its head in some ways. I would love to see that explored in the shmup space. And I don't mean stuff like Galaga, and the world's largest version of Galaga, or versus Galaga might be a little neat, but something along those lines would be fun to do. Maybe you could do it with the Space Invaders theme. I don't know. It would certainly be neat to do. I'm sort of thinking like Rampart meets Space Invaders.
That could be interesting.
I'm thinking about that, or there's a pretty rare cocktail from the game. I think it's called Wizards or Wizard Warfare. I'm trying to think of you know what I'm talking about? Where it came out for the 2600 too, where everyone's got their own little spot they defend. I think it was played along the lines of Pawn, where there's a ball in the middle and you're trying to defend your fortress. If you got into the middle, it would cause your fortress, you basically lost a round. But I think there was a 4-player version of a cocktail cabinet that was pretty rare. No, if I remember correctly, the Wizard of War, I think, was the title, that there was a cocktail cabinet that was
yes.
Yes, and it was a 4-player cocktail. Something along those lines would be pretty neat if it was done with shmups, where you're each protecting your base, something where you're trying to go out and get the other's base. And it's a lot of ways it plays in similar to Rampart, right? The 3-player version of Rampart.
Yeah.
Something like that would be neat to do, and would be unique for doing an arcade game. Is I tried the world's largest version of Galaga, and it didn't really do much for me there. I need something more interactive, something more party game. Right. And I think that the versus Pac-Man was a good start, but the ideas there could also apply to shmups pretty easily.
Yeah, I could see that.
4-player zeroing. Some other player set you up the bomb.
All your credit belong to us.
Indeed. All right. So, what's your pick for this?
Well, obviously, I framed the question around the idea that we were going to be talking about Raiden this month, and that Raiden is often considered the Toaplan game that wasn't, in a lot of ways. But I don't know. Another one that I think, looking at so many of these games, it occurs to me that there are a lot of games like this that are derivative, particularly early on in the development of the genre, as you started to see a lot of these games that were coming out in rapid succession, sort of in the early to mid 80s, I'll say, pre-Gradius. There was a lot of this stuff coming out. One of those examples would be Capcom's X to X's, and I think it's a solid enough game that sort of apes Xevious a little bit, but not completely. It's a very basic shoot 'em up, and in some ways it's almost like a slightly more sophisticated version of their previous game, Vulgus, Capcom's previous game. So it's almost Capcom ripping themselves off in a way. But, it's one of those that I think is solid and fun. It doesn't do anything remarkable or new and different, but it's just a good time. You throw a couple of credits in, blow up some stuff, and have fun. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. That ties in with my pick as well, where the company decided to rip themselves off, and I think it probably eclipses largely eclipsed the original series. I would have to say, for me, it's Proteus, or the Proteus series. They took the Gradius stuff and made it a farce of it, but the farce works in many ways better than this source material. And it really gives you unique combination. Like, who would have thought, well, let's have a flying octopus, why not? Or bunny girl, stuff like that people are still aping its style today, and the sort of joke upon it. I mean, look at even on the PC Engine with shoot, now the name escapes me. I mean, I need that 5th cup of coffee yet. The CD-ROM version, the one that has Bomberman and the PC Engine that shoots CDs.
Oh, Star Parodier.
Star Parodier, yep. I mean, that was undoubtedly inspired by Parodius. And then they had one that never came out that was that Sega did that came out, was weird for this TurboGrafx 16. It's CD-ROM. It was the parody that had Opa Opa in, but it was a Space Harrier game.
Oh,
It
yes.
never came out. They did that one that was a parody of that too.
Yes.
So, yeah, I can't.
Was that?
It's okay.
Was that Space Fantasy Zone?
That could be Space Fantasy Zone. My point is that the parody started out to just make fun of and ape the mechanics of Gradius and ended up, in my opinion, surpassing it. And I would rather play Parodius any day, fire up, whether it's the Super Sexy or the DOS series, or even the original Proteus on the MSX versus playing one of the Gradius titles.
I could see that.
They're cartoon fun.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so.
And I'm hopefully we can play sexy Proteus sometime in the next couple of years.
Yeah, it sure would be nice if Konami would start bringing some of those games out through arcade archives, or find a way to bring those out on modern consoles.
Yeah, are any of the Proteus series on the arcade archives?
Not yet.
Huh. Maybe they think it's like Goemon is on, right? The arcade version is.
Is it?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe they thought they're to Japan at this point, but that was why they didn't bring anything over after Legend of the Mystical Ninja, supposedly. But we're a far cry from 1993 now, so.
True. And, I mean, Arcade Archives has Pistol Daimyo, so Parodius is tame by comparison.
Indeed. Or even looking into some stuff, I'm sure there's probably at least 10 copies of some Ninja Jaja Maru game out there on Arcade Archives.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I or even Pocky and Rocky on there. I mean, I'm surprised that we actually got those two in the West.
Right.
Or 3 in the West, I should say.
Yeah, 3 now.
No, it's 4 now. Pocky and Rocky 2, Pocky and Rocky with Becky or plus Becky on the Game Boy Advance.
Yes.
And then, yes, the sort of greatest hits version.
Right.
Which it just came out recently. So, should we jump into the news?
Well, before we do that, I thought we'd take a couple of minutes and talk about our focus shot of Mushihime-sama. I don't have a lot to say this month.
Yeah, I didn't really focus on the focus shot either.
Yeah, I just didn't have much time. I mean, I honestly didn't do nearly as much gaming this last month as I wanted to. But the one thing I will say is, one of the things that I'm learning, well, 2 things that I'm learning, I should say, are, number 1, I need to play this game more, because I find that if I'm away from it for too long, when I come back, I'm terrible. And even though I have a degree of muscle memory for Stage 1 and Stage 2, I still get tripped up. And it makes it hard to progress, because then I'm constantly trying to refine and rebuild that muscle memory again for those areas. So I need to find a way to squeeze more time with the game into my schedule so that I can progress more. Because, kind of leading to my second point, I'm beginning to understand a lot more clearly why so many shmup players use and abuse and love save states, and why so many prefer to play on MAME and emulator platforms rather than legit copies or real hardware, with the exception of things like the M2 Shot Triggers ports and stuff like that, where M2 actually gives you save states and good practice modes and things like that. But I'm beginning to understand more why players like these conveniences so much, because it really does help you to hone in on the areas that you really are weak in, and gives you the opportunity to attack those areas much more specifically in a targeted manner and work on those things so that you can try to overcome those weak points and then really solidify the overall approach that you're going to take. Case in point, I was messing around with it earlier and using the training feature. And so that gave me the opportunity to jump right to the Stage 2 boss, for example. Because the Stage 2 boss, for some reason, still trips me up. There are a couple of its patterns that if I don't make the same exact movements all the time, I can still get tripped up. And there's just enough RNG with the very first pattern that, because I think part of it is based on your movement, because it's sort of loosely aimed. So there's just enough RNG there that if I don't move in time or I move too far or whatever, I can get myself into a bad situation. So being able to quickly restart the boss over and over again to sort of build that familiarity over is really helpful. But all of that to say, I really need to concentrate on this game a little bit more so that I can really begin to get to the point where I can do stage 1 through 3 without problems. I can do bosses 1 through 3 without bombing, and then really start focusing in on stage 4 so that I can finally start, getting toward the end of the game.
Yeah, I think to your point of being save states becoming a necessity, for those of you who remember the VCRs and having to constantly have to rewind in order to get to your favorite spot in a movie versus discovering DVDs and the ability to chapter select, I mean, it definitely is a game changer in ability to practice and learn different patterns and try out new stuff without having to repeat the entire thing over and over again, hoping to get the same situation. It really is a requirement for things for your mastery of the game, and I think that a lot of arcade games or these remasters that we're seeing, regardless if it's M2 or not, majority of them are starting to have at least training modes in there now. Even look at the stuff by Livewire, right? The Livewire stuff, even though it's a port, the Mushi is a port of the is very similar to the Steam or PC port. It still has those quality of life features in, and I realize why people are going over to stuff like Shmup Mame and stuff in order to get those save states so that way they can practice and then perform on real hardware. There's, in fact, great example here with the Raiden for this month. I was predominantly working on the Mister on here. I fired up the Raiden project and started playing that, and then used save states to get a better feel of how things are. Is a little spoiler here. Once you get to stage 6, Raiden becomes quasi, not really quasi, but maybe proto bullet hell. It's pretty darn hard, and the ability to just jump to that and start practicing was a godsend.
Yeah.
So as far as Mushi, I definitely, muscle memory, it come back to, I'm still stuck primarily on stage 3 because I just haven't put in the time. It's my own fault on that one. Again, I found a little bit hard because I was drawn back into the arcade last month and had other family affairs to deal with, and when I was in the arcade there, I felt the lure of pinball, which just sucks up time like none other for me.
Right.
So it was time well spent, but it was time away from this game, so I'm hoping to get some more time in this month.
Sounds good.
All right. Now on to the news that you can use.
Indeed.
So, First bit of news is Ray's Arcade Chronology announced by Taito to compile arcade versions of Rayforce, Raystorm, and Ray Crisis for modern consoles. M2 is handling the ports, and the release is set for March 9th, 2023. Currently slated for Switch and PS4, and Amazon Japan Prime Day exclusive content of Argear, which is the originally scrapped Rayforce sequel. Do we know if that is Prime Day, that you have to order it on Prime Day in order to get it, or if that's...
That's my understanding based on some interpretations I've seen on Discord of the Japanese tweets. So if you pre-order the game on Amazon Prime Day from Amazon Japan, then you get the DLC code bonus for Argear. Now, I think that means you probably have to have a Japanese PSN or eShop account in order to redeem that. But the thing that's, well, it's annoying that they're doing that because it's been such a mystery that this game, never came out. But it's also annoying because hopefully they're not going to lock this game to just DLC. I mean, I'm hopeful that someone will pick this up for a wider international physical release and have that included on the cart or disc, like we get with similar to what we got with the Switch version of the Darius Cosmic Revelation, which included that Game Boy version of Sagaya, I believe it was. So I'm hoping that we have a similar situation. But the interesting thing about Argear is, of course, Argear was supposed to be the direct sequel to Rayforce, but the development apparently didn't get very far. I've seen different reports. Some people say there's only one stage in the game, and there was some footage that is available out on YouTube of the game playing, and it looks a lot like Rayforce. It's basically the same game engine or assets, with some changes. There are some reports that there were 2 levels completed in a version of the game that was dumped at one point from a test PCB or some kind of maybe it might have been floppy disks from the development environment. But in any case, based on the screenshot that shows in the tweet, there's speculation that this is one of those situations where maybe M2 was going to take the framework that was built with the original Argear bones and flesh it out into more of a full game, because the screenshot apparently doesn't show anything that has been released or seen of Argear so far. So if that's the case and M2 makes a full game out of Argear, that would be really cool, because obviously there are a lot of people who love Rayforce but are not crazy about Raystorm. Now, that's not me. I quite like Raystorm, and I think it's a logical follow-up from Rayforce, given the shift in arcades toward 3D hardware. But that said, I also really like Rayforce, so seeing a full 2D sequel in the style of the original game would be cool, and it's certainly something that I would want to play. So, yeah, I'm hoping that it doesn't just get locked to this one avenue, and we do have a way to play it, even if it's like a timed exclusive where it eventually gets released so that anybody can buy the DLC later on, or that it may be included in a physical release when it finally does come out.
Well, here's the thing with M2. I mean, they did an experiment with Was it with the Utoplan that they did this, where half of it was on disc, half of it had to be the DLC?
Well, yeah. With the Toplan Arcade Garage releases that they're doing, if you buy the physical, you get not only the arcade games, but then you also get the console ports included and all of that. Whereas if you buy the digital release of, let's say, the Hishu Same Same collection, you only get the arcade versions. And then if you want the DLC or if you want the console ports, then that's extra as DLC. Or the other bonus non-shmup arcade game is bonus DLC.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of feels like a glass half empty, half full, but I think that in this case, I'm more hopeful that this will just be an appendum, another part of DLC that will be also sold separately. If you buy in Prime Day, you get the code for free, but if you didn't, then you can just pay him $10 or whatever, and then you get the DLC. It wouldn't surprise me too if this came stateside via Limited Run Games, which is known to have a pretty good working relationship with them too. Hence they have Dangum Fever on, and almost said Dadgum, Dadgum Fever, and Dangan Fever, and out there they did Grega. I know they're certainly doing a lot more Livewire releases this year, but it wouldn't surprise me to see another M2 release in there.
Yeah, so let's hope that at some point we do see the R-Gear release available in a more wide fashion. Astroport has announced Armored Lab Force Vol vehicles, a vehicle-based run-and-gun / shmup hybrid. This is something that just got announced here within the last few days, I guess, as we record this, and all I can say by looking at the art for the game, the key art for the game, is if you're a fan of the waifu side of shmups, this might be up your alley. But it does kind of look like a fun game. It's sort of like, if you think of the vehicle portions of Blaster Master or the Blaster Master Zero games, but you have the ability to hover and fly a little bit more readily, and that's all the game is the side-scrolling drive, jump, and hover, fly, / then shoot enemies and stuff, then yeah, that might be a game that interests you.
I think I speak for most of our audience here when I ask, does it come with giant mutated frogs? Because if there's no giant mutated frogs in the game, then I'm not so sure.
I cannot speak to that. I did not see any in the trailer, but that doesn't mean that they're not there.
We'll have to wait and see. We also have a new indie shmup named A2 Zygon in development. Now, I don't know too much about this, other than obviously it's in development. Can you fill us in on the details?
Yeah. This is from developer Solderix at SolidSpy24 on Twitter, and it looks very interesting. It sort of has an almost NES kind of aesthetic. Very NES by way of Zero Ranger, but with a larger color palette. I don't know, it's hard to categorize, but it sort of looks like an NES style Danmaku. It uses a floating protagonist a la Esperade or something like that.
Yeah, to me it almost looks in some ways, I know it's aping from the Nintendo style, but it's got too many colors to be in there. It definitely tries and goes for more of a 12-bit aesthetic, maybe.
Yeah, that's how I like to classify it. You know, it's sort of like what's the game?
Well, it reminds me a lot of the style that you would get from not Castle from sort of like Shovel Knight is a little bit maybe better graphic. I don't want to say better, but more like 16-bit graphics than you would see with this. But this definitely has the style in here that you would get with a lot of your retro realism. There's that game that I particularly, I'm trying to think of the name, but you ordered it from Limited Runs not too long ago with the Metroidvania with the 3 characters.
Yeah, Axiom Verge 2?
No, not Axiom Verge 2. The one where you swap out between a wizard, there's a knight, and then there's a thief. Metroidvania, oh shoot. This is the one podcast where we can't remember any of the names.
Right.
You know what I'm trying to son of a gun. We'll just copy. What's the one that you ordered but I didn't? It started with an E, I think. Games. Hold on. Not Ender Lilies. Not Monster Sanctuary. Oh, plumbers don't wear ties. That's it. No. No, it's the. You will order it because I asked you. I was about to, but I just didn't have the money, and you said that someone else liked it. Pam.
Oh.
What's that game? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. I just can't think of the name off the top of my head. But yeah. But I know what you mean. And Shovel Knight was the game I was trying to come up with earlier, where, yeah, it sort of has that aesthetic that kind of looks too good to be 8-bit, but it doesn't quite have the vibrant or detailed look that you would get in a higher quality Sega Genesis game or a Super Nintendo game of a 16-bit. So it kind of has that what I like to refer to as 12-bit aesthetic, because it's somewhere in between.
Astalon, Tears of the Earth.
Yes, Astalon, Tears of the Earth. Yes.
And I guess in some ways people could be thinking that La Mulana is another one that comes sort of close on there, where it's not quite. It's very close. Although La Mulana might be more closer to 16-bit, but it sort of you get along those lines. Astalon is probably the better example.
Right.
Still, it definitely looks interesting. With the muted color palette, it reminds me also of what's that, Project Orange? But no, what's that game that's no? Oh shoot! Again, I forgot the name. The orange one, you mentioned it earlier. The orange one, Zero Ranger.
Zero Ranger.
Zero Ranger. It reminds me of Zero Ranger with the muted palette.
Right.
So it definitely has the potential to be a good game. Hopefully it becomes a RPG staple when it's released in December 2022. And speaking of staples, we got our next news item, which is well-known person and a well-known series.
Yeah, so the Electric Underground, Mark MSX, he did a video recently on the Gradius series, sort of a retrospective, and he had Kyo Kusagani as a special guest covering the series, and that was a fun watch. The two of them sort of going through ranking the Gradius games and talking about the development and evolution of the series.
Definitely worth a watch. And then we not only Mark been keeping busy, but Shmup Junkie is hard at work on a video covering all Mega Drive / Genesis shooters. Yeah, this will definitely be something I look forward to. And there better be some footage of him throwing the giant fish pillow at Timmy.
Well, I can tell you what will be in the video is some footage of my hand and arm inserting cartridges into a Model 1 Sega Genesis and a JVC Xi because a couple of us in Junkie's Discord volunteered to do footage of us inserting cartridges into the systems the way that he did for his full PC Engine review video. And so myself and Giggity Wing and a couple of others filmed ourselves or recorded ourselves inserting cartridges because we actually owned some of these games. And so some of the physical copies that I had that Junkie didn't have, I set up a little folding table with the Genesis and the box there, and then, inserting the cartridge. So you'll see a little bit of footage of me, but just my hand and my arm dropping that stuff into the console in front of my shelf full of Genesis games. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. But right now, based on the 2-game teaser video that he put out recently, it's unlisted, so you can't watch it unless you're a member of his Discord and have the direct link. But based on that alone, I think it's going to be an epic video. Right now he's saying it's something in the 3-hour mark, but it's going to be awesome.
Wow, that's a long runtime, but yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. And I suspect, or at least hopeful, that the Truckster review comes to us from the Intergalactic Game Room.
Yes, the Intergalactic Space Arcade.
Yes.
There are a couple of, I would call them more marquee shooting game titles that have recently released. You've got Pocky and Rocky Reshrined, which some don't consider to be a pure shmup, but certainly is in the conversation as an overhead run and gun with many shmuppy elements. And then you also have Eurokill, the Calumniation games, which is something that I had to look at twice to make sure I was saying it right. That's been published now here in the West by NIS America, and it's sort of an interesting visual novel shoot-'em-up hybrid. And it's one of those things where once you play through the story mode with the full visual novel, you can unlock the gameplay where you can go back and play just the shmup portion. And so that'll be an interesting one to look at, but it was developed in part by G-Rev. And so that'll be an interesting one to kind of look at.
Yeah, Pocky and Rocky is definitely something I'm looking forward to playing. I don't care about the controversy or what people think. It looks to be just a fun sort of greatest hits of the Pocky and Rocky series, and similar to the way that Shredder's Revenge was a greatest hits culmination of the NES, Game Boy, and arcade titles for the Turtles. I know that some people are disappointed that the Shredder's Revenge isn't a direct sequel to the arcade games. It's more of a modern take on it, but I've been playing with my son and I enjoy it, so I'm hoping to get the same type of enjoyment out of Pocky and Rocky. And Yuri Kill, heck, it sounds wacky, so I already like it.
Yeah, it's sort of like Danganronpa and a shmup all combined. So why not?
Yeah. Nichibitsu shooter Big Fighter is public on the Mr. FPJ core, an R-Type core in development, as well as a full M72 core. I think the M72 core is what's running R-Type.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, that's the hardware that's on. But I'm trying to think of, I think M82 is what's running in the hunt, so we'll have to wait for that one hopefully soon. But the recently released K-Core now has Donpachi, so hopefully if you're looking for more bees, the Mister has it for you.
Just a couple more shots. Gotta love announcer Bob. Speaking of more games being released here, we got a couple more through Arcade Archives. A couple of Namco games, actually. Dragon Saber has been announced, and so that'll be coming soon. That, of course, is the sequel to Dragon Spirit. And I don't believe we've ever had a Dragon Saber release in the West. So this, as far as I'm aware, should be the first time that this game has ever come stateside. So I'm looking forward to that. And then what's actually come out here recently is a Namco arcade shooter called Thunder Scepter. And this is sort of an interesting rail shooter of sorts, a very kind of early Star Fox type of thing where you're flying into the screen. Kind of think of the Super Nintendo game Hyper Zone, but an earlier, more primitive version of that. Looks like it could be fun.
I'm going to check it out. So we also have Octane's Blind Shmup Kumite series has been very active recently, including a June 26th run of Raiden Fighters between Octane and Desmaku. And I apologize for butchering those, but I did go to the Mark MSX School of Japanese Pronunciation.
Right. Yeah, and unfortunately when Octane ran this, I missed it because it started, I think, while I was still at work. So I didn't get to watch it, but I'm going to have to go back and scope that on the on his YouTube channel and take a look at that. Yeah. That should be good. Bullet Soul and its sequel, Bullet Soul Infinite Burst, are coming to the Nintendo Switch September 9th in Japan and September 22nd worldwide, from what I was able to glean. And that's pretty cool because from a console perspective, it has been locked on the 360. Now, those games have been released on Steam, but it is nice to see that it will be available more widely for console audiences as well.
You know, I'm willing to bet that Limited Run or Strictly Limited will pick those up. I'm pretty certain we'll see a physical of those.
Probably.
And speaking of physicals, here we have a double pack that's coming out from Limited Run Games. It's available until July 24th. We have Raiden 4, Mikado Edition, and Raiden 5, all in one package, so you get your coffee and you get your crystals.
Yeah.
All in one convenient cart.
And when I first saw this announcement, I thought, this seems like a very useless release, because we already have Raiden 4 Cross Mikado, and we have Raiden 5, because we got a physical of it on the Switch. But I was quickly disabused of that notion, because apparently the physical for Raiden 5 quickly sold out, has not been reprinted, and is now going for more than the original retail. Money. Yeah, there were some listings on eBay that were $100. So
yeah, crazy taxi, crazy money.
Yeah. So I guess I guess it's a good thing that somebody else is making it available again.
You know what's funny is because this game has received so much publicity since that it even brought up the PS4 version. The PS4 version used to be dirt cheap, like $12 or something. Now it's in like 30s to 40s.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and see, for my money, the PS4 version's the way to go.
Oh, certainly. Certainly, because the PS4, remember, the graphics were downscaled for the Switch version anyways, but the... yeah, I don't know, maybe people really thought the cheer system would work better with the Switch, but I mean, if you ask me for all the Raiden titles to play, Raiden 5 is definitely not on my top 5.
Yeah, see, and I continue to be a Raiden 5 defender.
It's serviceable, sure, but it's nowhere near. It's sort of like saying, well, hey, we're going to come out with Gradius 4. It's like, yeah, cool, I like Gradius 4, but if I want to play Gradius, I'll play Gradius 2 or Gradius 5, maybe even Gradius 1 before I go play Gradius 4.
Sure. I understand that.
I mean, it's the weakest link, to me at least, the weakest link in a strong line of series. Not my first choice. But definitely do not sleep on the Raiden 5 and the Raiden 4 double pack.
Yes. Yeah. Specifically now that we are in the Summer of Raiden.
Or you may be struck by lightning. So, speaking of this Summer of Thunder and Lightning, who joined us to kick off?
Well, of course, it was you and I. We also had Silius, and we had several players who joined via Discord, including Mighty Squirrel, Orc Commander, SPM, Dubs, Scoush, and Schlarp. And then from our set of regulars and semi-regulars, we had Corkman, Geriatric Danmaku, Easy Racer, and Faux Macho.
I like the name Schlarp. It sounds like it could be either a knockoff or maybe a cousin to Snarf from the Thundercat series.
It's the cheap Chinese knockoff version.
Schlarp and Robert Kopp.
Robert Kopp. Yes.
Yep. Speaking of which, aren't they supposed to be releasing or doing another RoboCop game? I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out.
Yes, they are.
That would be interesting if that turned into Running Gun. I mean, the Data East, well, there was Data East, but the arcade games had some interesting things. At least the first one was interesting. The second one was, yeah.
Well, the second one was interesting, too, because it was sort of like RoboCop the beat-em-up.
Well, the second, if you're talking about the second arcade one,
right,
that's a totally different animal. If you're talking about the NES one, oh, heck no.
Oh, right.
There's a reason why there's an AVGN episode on that.
Yeah.
So, no, but this, yeah, the arcade one is interesting. I do like that. It's sort of like the differences between Hook on the console versus Hook on the arcade. Definitely different gameplay. Anyways, so let's talk about the first game in the Raiden series. So the developer was Seibu Denshi, which was founded in 1982 in Chiyoda-ku, Tokyo, Japan. And their first game released was Steiner, which is a side-scrolling STG built on a vertical monitor like Scramble, with backgrounds that have been angled to look that have an angled look to them. The company later changed their name to Seibu Kaihatsu in 1984, sometime after the release of the arcade shooting game Skyon. Now, if I remember correctly, it wasn't Skyon. What was the game that they developed with their mascot, the Blue Dragon? Was that Wizard or Orb, or do you know what the name of the game is?
I don't remember specifically which of the games they developed that contained the mascot. Let me look.
The blue Godzilla-like creature, yes. Seibu Kaihatsu did some subcontracting for Taito throughout the 80s, including games like Knuckle Joe, Empire City 1931, and Panic Road. He also released a shoot 'em up called Air Raid, which is known as Cross Shooter internationally through Taito, which hasn't been emulated yet, but looks like Raiden by way of Twinbee. Other notable Seibu games include Dead Angle and Dynamite Duke, which we talked about earlier there. You got your semi-Cabal-like game. Both gallery shooters based on the previous work they did on Empire City. And Sienku, aka Battle Balls, a puzzle game. Raiden itself was released in 1990 and was a major arcade hit, selling over 17,000 units worldwide. Game Magazine listed as in the July 1st, 1990 issue as the most successful table arcade unit at the time, outperforming Konami's Trigun and Sega's Columns. It ended up at 6th highest grossing arcade game of 1990 and the 5th highest grossing in 1991 in Japan. Now, what's interesting to note is this is sort of the last gasp of what would be the pre-Street Fighter, one-on-one fighter, competitive fighting game era. Raiden itself is really the culmination of everything that came before it from the early 80s, such as Zaxxon, even though it doesn't use the isometric perspective, but there's Zaxxon, Space Invaders, all that stuff through Gradius, up until they hit the old school shooters. Would you say arguably hit their peak right around this time?
Yeah, I mean, certainly what I would consider the second wave of shooting games, which I think probably started with Gradius. I think it was probably peaking at this point in time, yes.
Yeah, this is probably the last year that shooting games would rule the arcade and become a major focus. After this, they were still relevant, but it gave the rise of the Danmaku after this. We commonly see people say that Raiden is not something that is overly impressive, but it's so very well built and plays so well that people still culminate to it. It's excuse me. It's not revolutionary of its own, but it has enough of its evolutionary steps to make a very solid product.
Right.
That's see. I've seen also some people online arguing that it could be also referred to as the first proto Danmaku because of how much you have to watch out for the bullets after stage 6. So, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that this qualifies as a Danmaku after stage 6 or around stage 6?
No, I think people sometimes conflate Danmaku or bullet hell with lots of bullets, but I think there's more to it than that. I think you have to have the patterns, and I think you have to have the smaller hitbox and some of these other things that really make a Danmaku game a Danmaku game. So
there we go.
I think
that's what we're doing. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think that you just gave away some of the title that we need to do for a guided episode. What makes a Danmaku game Danmaku with Mark MSX?
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a clear delineation between what makes a good Danmaku game and then what makes a traditional shoot 'em up just have lots of bullets and in a situation where the developer says, "Give me your money, please." I think this is a clear case of the latter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and I think that's something that we'll have to revisit with, as previously mentioned, Mark MSX, and see if we can get it nailed down. What are the requirements, or what makes a Danmaku a Danmaku?
Yeah.
So this Fabtech licensed Raiden for distribution in North America, where it also became a big success. And this game, I think, would be up there for the most ports on any given system. There are a heck of a lot of these. It was ported to the Sega Mega Drive / Genesis under the title Raiden Trad. And I have to say, I think it was ported by the same people who did Curse, if I remember correctly, for the Genesis version.
Oh.
And that's why it stands out, because it has a scoreboard, sort of scoreboard letterboxing, but at the same time it gives you that nice vertical aspect ratio. So you don't end up with a horizontal, what's the word I'm looking for? Vertical.
Right.
The vertical look that you get with something like Vassar or things just appear out. I think the biggest issue that we had with this, where it was something that was horizontal because it didn't fit the resolution, was the TurboGrafx 16 port of Image Fight. For everything felt off and your hitboxes felt off because they didn't maintain the aspect ratio. So props off to the Genesis, even though it doesn't have the soundtrack isn't, in my opinion, quite up to par. It's a little bit muted. There, it's certainly a very well ported and miles above the Super Famicom or Super Nintendo version. Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
So we talked about Micronics earlier, and Micronics took over the port of this one, and avoid it.
Yeah.
Not only is the sound terrible on this, it doesn't maintain the aspect ratio, the sound effects are terrible. If you want to think people, you probably would say on the box, Raiden from the same people who ported 1942. Should give you an idea. The PC Engine versions has around the same issues that the Image Fight does, where the aspect ratio is not really preserved correctly, so you get into where you're getting hit and stuff, and it just doesn't feel 100%. It's still pretty well done, don't get but it feels a little off.
Right.
Like Image Fight, I really liked the way it looked, and it felt very close to the arcade, but at the same time, it just didn't preserve that vertical aspect ratio, which really throws things off. The other part I didn't like about the PC Engine, maybe you did, but the shots sounded like popcorn.
Oh, yeah, they did. And, of course, that's not uncommon with a lot of console ports of shooting games from that era. And the Genesis version really isn't much different or much better in that regard.
True.
But, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, and the PC Engine CD version, which is also known as Super Raiden, I think did a pretty cool way with Red Book Audio, but it's just the TurboGrafx or PC Engine version with orchestral sound, which
pretty much.
To be fair, yeah, I mean R-Type did something a little bit the same way, but the R-Type version did things a little bit better by adding cutscenes.
Well,
it's definitely neat,
and I think R-Type, Super R-Type, fared better in that regard because it did something interesting and unique with the soundtrack, whereas the Super Raiden, it's just a sort of slightly rocky, but mostly, as you say, symphonic or orchestral type of soundtrack.
Yeah.
So,
but to be fair, a lot of the games that was normal at the time, where they would just throw orchestral soundtrack on a lot of the stuff. A lot of the TurboGrafx 16 games were that way, and to be fair, a lot of the Sega CD games were that way too. But I was thinking about what's the is it Soul Feast I'm thinking of?
Oh yeah, Soul Feast and Soul Deece.
Yeah, that are very similar in that way. I'm not knocking. I do like the sound of the Super Raiden. It just feels like they could have done maybe a little bit more. Now, if it had maybe been like in an arcade cart release or something, maybe they could have done a little bit more. But I think it's just a regular CD-ROM version 3.
Something like that.
Yeah. And then we have the Atari Jaguar port, which is arguably the best port that we've had out of this so far. It's the closest to the arcade, and the sound is not quite on there, but it's right up there probably with Tempest 2000 as one of the best titles on the Jaguar.
Yeah, which is a little sad, but that's how it goes.
It is. It's certainly better than the PC port. The PC port's serviceable, but it has some major problems of trying. You get sound, or you get music. You really don't get both at the same time.
Right.
But that's alright. That PC port is what it is. And then we got, of course, the FM Towns Marty port, which I hear is the best port out of the lot. I didn't have a chance to try that one. Did you?
No, I did not get a chance to try that one.
And then we have the 1997 port on the Atari Lynx. The Atari Lynx port, from what I've seen, seems to be pretty good for the system, but it's still not the best way to play it. It's neat that you can, of course, play the Lynx vertically and play that way, but it's more of a novelty.
Yeah, the Lynx version is interesting. I'm not even sure what to think about it, because you don't really have a laser. You sort of have this hybrid shot. So either you get a spread shot of sorts, or you get a less of a spread shot with sort of a rapid fire forward shot. And when you pick up power-ups, you get your main shot and your secondary shot at the same time. And the secondary shot, I think, is always homing missiles. And the homing missiles are fairly strong. There's no music in the game. And when you actually play that version, it seems like maybe it's a beta build. I don't think it's a final build, because it's prone to crashing, and I don't know, it's just kind of janky, but it looks promising. And I think if Telegames, who put the version together, would have put a little bit more time and effort into it, I really think it could have been a pretty cool take on the game. But as it stands, it's sort of an interesting curio of its time.
Yeah, so it describes me, janky but promising.
Right.
So, I mentioned earlier that I have played what I consider to be the best way to play this game right now, which, aside from an Arcade Archives release, is to play it on the PlayStation 1 via the Raiden Project, which came to North America, which bundles Raiden and Raiden 2, together with bonus range soundtracks, a fully 3D intro sequence, and it was also released on the PlayStation Network for PS3 and PSP. Honestly, I still think this is the best way to play it. Maybe I'll change my mind after I play the Arcade Archives, but with the save states and flipping through everything on the Mister, it just made it really easy to keep trying different portions of it over and over again.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, when I went back through and played this, I did a stream, a Raiden smorgasbord, and I played several different versions of Raiden. Most of the ones that you mentioned there, minus a couple glaring omissions. But when I finished it off by playing the Raiden Project and firing that up, it felt so good. And it reminded me of when I used to play a decent amount of Raiden and Raiden 2 on the Raiden Project on my PlayStation years ago. Because I bought this game, I got my PlayStation in 98 or 99, and I bought this game probably within the first year of owning the console. So I played a lot of Raiden back in the day, and it always felt really good to play. Now here's the interesting thing. One of the options that you have in the game menus is to actually rotate the visual or the screen so that you get your Tate effect. But for whatever goofy reason, even though you can rotate the screen orientation, the controls don't rotate. They do in the Japanese version, so you can rotate the screen orientation and then have the controls stay normal. But in the US release, when you rotate your screen 90 degrees counterclockwise, you have to turn your controller 90 degrees counterclockwise to play it. The only way around that is, my understanding, through a GameShark code of some kind that will allow you to then also rotate your controls back to normal. However, the upside to that is if you want to play this on PSP, that gives you the chance to do the screen rotation on PSP, and then if you turn your PSP on its side, it's just like holding the PlayStation controller in that 90 degrees counterclockwise kind of way. So it actually works very well. And when I took my mini vacation here a few weeks ago, I took my PSP with me and played a little bit of Raiden in my hotel on PSP, and that works. That's really slick, and that's a legit way to play that game.
Yeah, it sounds fun. I'll have to try that out.
Yeah.
Now, you've got in here notes that there is also a Java mobile-based phone version released in 2004 by Com2 US. I haven't seen any footage on this, but considering it's a Java-based mobile phone release, I'm sure it's hot kasuge.
It's interesting. There's actually a Java loader, J2ME loader for Android phones, and so I downloaded that and I got a hold of it and I tried it out. It's interesting. It's difficult because, of course, you're playing by, it was a game that would have come out for the older mobile phones that had full keypads and all of that, and so you would use your little center directional buttons to control it, and then you would use the number keys down below to fire or to drop bombs, things like that. So, of course, having to try and use touchscreen touches or presses on a virtual directional thing is not very good. And so it's harder to play then. Also, the power-ups, the power-up changes color really fast, so it's difficult to time getting the right one so that you can upgrade properly. But it's an interesting port, and I could see if I had got myself, if this had come out in North America and I had a capable cell phone in the 2005 to 2007 range when I had a flip phone, if this was a thing that was available to me, I probably would have bought it.
All right, well, fire up your Motorola Razr. Let's go.
Right.
Yeah, the way you mentioned those power-ups being maybe a little too fast reminded me of sometimes I felt like I was chasing power-ups even in the PlayStation version, chasing a over-sugar toddler across the screen.
Right.
So I can only imagine on a Java version.
Yeah.
So the Raiden Legacy was also released by .emu in 2012. It includes the original Raiden and was released on PC and mobile platforms. I think this is the one that's on GOG.
I think you're right.
And then Raiden was released in Hamster Arcade Archives for Nintendo Switch in 2021. And will also be included in the Astro City Mini V system when it releases later this year. Raiden was followed by a direct sequel and a remix of the game known as Raiden DX. Also received now Raiden DX is the sequel if I remember correctly, right? Am I thinking that right? Raiden DX is a remix of 2?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a remix of 2, but I'm trying to think of. Yeah, it was. Okay, yeah. I was thinking about the Tate mode that you were talking about earlier, but or as GameSet calls it, Tate mode. But I remember that DX was only for Raiden 2, which introduced the toothpaste laser. I was a
Yep.
little disappointed I couldn't use toothpaste in this mode. It's alright. So, we also received a spin-off series known as Raiden Fighters, which we'll talk about in maybe at the very end here. I'm definitely enjoying playing Raiden Fighters for this month. STG Weekly covered this in episode 86, showcasing a one-loop clear from Player Cream. I have to go back and look because I'm always enjoying me some STG Weekly. My favorite, though, is the one where they all watch shmup commercials. Some of those are so wacky. Shmupulations released a pair of interviews from Sibu Kahatsu, Moss staff regarding Viper Phase 1, which is his spin-off. A 2006 developer interview was translated from the linear notes of Raiden 3 Super Play DVD, and the 1997 interview with Shuichi Mori and Yoritaka Kasai covers the origins of the company as well as their desire for level realism in their games. Yeah, I think that Raiden, maybe other than Gradius, well, it's even longer than that. Raiden, after Raiden Fighters stuff took place, or you could even just kick off with looking at the Raiden 2. Is that the longest time between the sequel and the game? Because the next time it came out was Raiden 3 on the PS2, right? In like 2003, 2004? I don't even think that even the Gradius ports took that long to go from Gradius 4 to Gradius 5. I think Gradius 4 was what, 2001?
Yeah, but between Gradius 3 and Gradius 4, it was quite a long wait.
Yeah, well, it's about 10 years, but we're talking like 20 years here for Raiden.
Well, it wasn't quite that long, because Raiden 3 was a PS2 game.
Right, but Raiden 3 was, what, 2004, 2005, maybe? Either way, it's certainly one of the longer waits that we've had between sequels.
Right.
Alright, everybody get ready. We've got the story coming up next. 80-20-90. So, it doesn't have 20XX in here. Oh well. Suddenly, the world is attacked by aliens from outer space. The world has united forces which fight back fiercely. Top world scientists have analyzed wreckage of enemy planes shut down and created a supersonic fighter bomb named Raiden. Okay. However, since these aircrafts are so technically sophisticated, there's only one pilot in the world able to handle it. The Raiden is just about to take off, and the fate of the entire world is dependent upon this Raiden. Yeah, originally the enemies were known as the Carnassians. I always almost accidentally called them the Cardassians.
That's right.
Carnassians, but this later retconned in favor of the crystals, which the series became known for. Yeah, coffee and crystals indeed.
So realistically, you could say that that the plot for the original Raiden is really just a reality TV series for the military, keeping up with the Carnassians.
Oh, jeez. There's our dad joke quota. Yeah, I mean, it's the same way with the Bacterians, right? In the way that we went with the series on. In fact, you could have used Life Force as your example for Ape the Systems and maybe made it better. I would think that the Life Force is sort of keeping the Gradius gameplay, but foregoing the power-up bar was a little bit of a bold choice that made it, in my opinion, better.
Yeah.
Yeah, this story is nonsensical as 98% or 99% of shmups, but it gets along just as well.
Right. Well, any excuse to pew pew and shoot and go boom.
You know, that's. I think that you just got our next shirt. An excuse to pew pew and go boom.
There you go. So let's break down some gameplay. Raiden is a 2-button game. You have one button for shot and one button to bomb. technically speaking, the original arcade release does have auto fire, but it's one of those things where when you hold the button down, you get one shot, and then as the one shot reaches way out from your ship, then you get another shot. So it really isn't practical to use it in any kind of real-world sense. There are 2 primary shot types, and you can earn the power-up icons by taking out these mid-size carrier ships. The first is the Vulcan shot, which is your red power-up type, or Vulcan, I guess you could call it a spread shot as well. And it's essentially a twin shot that fires forward from your plane, and then as you power it up, it spreads out more until max power, where it spans about a 90-degree swath across the screen, outwards in front of your ship. There's also the laser shot, which is the blue power-up, and that gives you a forward-firing laser that starts out as these thin, short bursts of laser shots, and then when you power that up to level 2, it creates a larger stream, and then a twin stream, then a triple stream, a quadruple stream, etc., until eventually it becomes a full, wide beam that spans nearly the width of your whole ship, and becomes a very powerful laser beam.
Yeah, what's interesting with these, and sort of surprised me that it's sort of taking what would become the Danmaku formula, but it's sort of broken down here, right? You can't. You have your typical 3-button shots that would come later, right? You have your auto fire, your bomb, and then you have your focus shot. And you're not going to have that within this game. So you're sort of switching off between your focus shot, which is your laser shot, and then your Vulcan shot, which is good for popcorn. It's so interesting. And I've seen it sort of broken down to where the Vulcan shot, along with the homing missiles, is good for dealing with the popcorn. And the laser shot, along with the M power-ups or the more powerful missiles, is good for dealing with the bosses and the mid-size enemies. And that's in line with the way that I play too. Depending upon the areas that you were dealing with is where you'd swap it out. But if they had gone to a 3-button system where you had a focus shot, you had a regular shot, you hold it down and you get into the toothpaste laser is probably a bad example because that's part of Raiden 2. But within the laser, I don't think it would have worked as well. I think it had to have been done here. Even if you're trying to modernize this, I don't think you would change the system.
Yeah. The main thing that I would have said is either make auto fire a default, or at least make it a dip switch on the board that operators could enable. Or make it a 3-button game and you have one button be auto fire.
Yeah, the JAMA standard would allow for that, so you certainly could have done it. Maybe they said, well, we only have this game in here. We're trying to make sure we do it cheap, but we do it well. We only got spot for 2 buttons. That's all you get.
Huh, right. Now, you also have 2 sub-weapons that you can pick up, and these are generally hidden in boxes on the ground. Not really hidden so much, but there are boxes on the ground that you can destroy, and some of those will contain the sub-weapons. So you have the missiles, or the M power-up. It's sort of the floating M icon. It gives you forward-firing missiles in short bursts. The second time you power that up, it doubles the amount of missiles, and then on the third time, or on the third power-up, then it increases their size and strength. You also have...
Yeah, and that should be noted too, that when you switch between those two, if you have a laser and you're switching between, or even with the missiles and you switch between them, let's say you have a laser and then you're powered up to level 2 and then you hit a Vulcan shot, it just switches you over. It doesn't power it up at the same time.
Right. Yes. You also have the homing missiles, or the H power-up icon, which give you a pair of small homing missiles, and then when you power that up a second time that increases to 4 missiles and makes them a little bit larger, and then powering up a third time increases their size and strength again and makes them even faster. There are bomb pickups, which are sort of this spinning bee in a triangle, and that each one will add a bomb to your stock. And the one thing I'll say is that the differentiation is with your standard and sub-weapon power-ups is when they spawn, they sort of do this thing where they create a spiral effect, similar to a much slower version of the Dreamcast logo. You know, when you boot up a Dreamcast, you've got this spiral that starts and kind of goes out several times around. The power-ups...
That's because it's thinking.
Yeah, it's thinking, indeed. The power-ups in Raiden do a similar thing. And then, of course, your standard power-up will cycle back and forth between red and blue. And then your sub-weapon power-up will cycle back and forth between M and H. And so it's a matter of knowing when and where to capture those to get the upgrade that you want. But the bomb power-up does this odd thing where it sort of arcs around a little bit and then bounces off the screen and then arcs another way a little ways. I think it sort of tries to kinda target where you're at so that it will reach you, but it's a little weird the way that it works. It's similar to some of the Toaplan power-ups in that sense, where they don't really move where you want them to move or where you think they're going to move. It has its own path.
Yeah, I have to say though that the bombs are especially powerful in this game. I think that's the reason they're so powerful is they're built upon Texmanium technology. That stuff's just killer.
Yeah. Oh, and with the regular power-ups as well, when they go in their spiral, I want to say it's 4 or 5 rotations, maybe 6, but after they rotate out a certain number of times, they will leave the screen. There are other pickups that you can get, which include medals. Those are in boxes on the ground usually. There's the Miklus, which you mentioned earlier. That's kind of the Seibu Kaihatsu mascot character, sort of a little blue dragon. And then there's a hidden fairy 3 times throughout the game that you uncover by destroying a piece of scenery. And so there's a tree in stage 1 and stage 4 that you can destroy. And then in stage 6, there's a patch of sand that you can shoot a whole bunch in order to reveal the fairy. There are also 2 1-ups that you can spawn in the game based on some preset conditions. One of them in stage 4, there's an enemy outpost where there's this sort of center portion, and then spread out from that are a couple of channels with 2 smaller spots. And so if you destroy the centerpiece, then the 2 side pods will release, and then the left side one will contain the 1-up. The second one is, I don't remember where SPM said it was, but I want to say that one of these 2 power-ups, you have to have died at least once before it will spawn, which is interesting. There's also the P icon, which is just the letter P in a box, and that grants you full power for your primary and secondary weapons, assuming you have both equipped. These will appear a couple of places in the game arbitrarily, or if you die and you continue, then you'll get a P icon typically when you start, or if you capture a fairy and then die, it will offer you the full power-up icon that first time. The game plays out over 8 stages, and then it does go into a second harder loop with faster bullets. One of the interesting things about the game is that Player 2, which is the blue plane, versus Player 1, which is the red plane, Player 2 actually lowers your rank. So if you play on the Player 2 side, you'll have slightly slower bullets, you'll have fewer enemies to contend with, and the overall rank will be lower.
Yeah, and that's carried over with at least with the PlayStation version, if you're doing 2 players. As long as there's one person on the screen, it doesn't restart you at a checkpoint.
Right.
You can keep continuing. And that was, I thought, sort of a nice nod to, and it's probably one of the better ways that I've seen 2 players done. In fact, if you set off, I hate to draw like a Dragon Ball Z reference here, but if you use a certain attack and they combine together, you can sort of do like a fusion attack with both players. If you hit the right button, you can do sort of like a super Kamehameha wave or something similar. I'm trying to remember the details here, but with the 2-player, you can do a super attack if you do the attacks at the same time, and sort of like close to being on top of each other.
Right. Yeah. If one player's plane is in front of the other or higher up on the screen, and then the other one is directly behind them or beneath them on the screen, if the player who is behind or beneath shoots up into the rear of the plane that's in front of it, it will shoot out these green spark-looking things that fire out in all directions and sort of creates a little bit more of a, not a spread attack, but definitely allows for a little bit more crowd control if you start to have some enemies that you're not taking out and you're beginning to get overwhelmed. Which is kind of a neat feature, and I think probably the first time that I can recall a shooting game implementing that kind of 2-player cooperative feature like that, where you can work together to create a new way of attacking the enemy.
Yeah, it's definitely unique for this game and very well welcomed. The other point I want to make out real quickly in regards to the fairies and the mascot character there, if you collect them, it does add to your score, but they don't do anything at the stage end score. They're just extra bonus points.
Right. Max power for your primary weapons is 10. And one interesting thing that was noted in the STG Weekly episode is, after you collect 5 power-ups, your plane changes configuration. The front of the plane sort of opens up a little bit, and it makes this great noise. And then it also increases the size of your hitbox. So, something to keep in mind. And then the max power-up for your missile weapon is 3. So once you collect the 3rd one, you're at max power. The other minor difference between your player 1 and player 2 craft, in addition to the rank thing, is that I guess player 1 has slightly faster movement vertically, and player 2 has slightly faster movement horizontally. There's been some debate on this because I think that's maybe more noticeable in Raiden 2. So there's been some question as to whether or not this is the Mandela effect. People trying to determine if this is actually a thing in the original Raiden versus maybe it's in Raiden 2 and their games are similar enough that people think maybe it's also in Raiden 1. I did not do side-by-side comparisons myself to confirm this, so I'll say take that with a grain of salt and verify for yourself.
Yeah, it sounds like it's Ken and Ryu of the of the Raiden series here.
Right. There are some bullets in the game that are destructible, Like with a lot of other shooting games of the era, they're usually the spinning football shape. And so some of those you can actually destroy with your own fire. Game rank generally affects enemy health and bullet speed. And upon death, you lose all your power-ups and go back to just the standard reg forward shot. But of course, rank is reset to minimum again to help increase your chances of survival. The playfield is larger than the horizontal size of your Tate monitor, so you scroll left and right to reveal more of the scenery. And interestingly enough, the game uses what I'll refer to as an offset scroll. So if you move your ship all the way over to one side of the screen and are literally touching, let's say, the right-hand side of the screen, as soon as you begin to move left, the screen starts to scroll. Versus having to go all the way to the right side of the screen and then reach at least the center of the screen again before it begins to scroll back left. So it's a different method than you typically see in games of this style.
It also doesn't give you the tunnel vision that you get from a lot of shmups, or feeling that you're in a cone. It does a good way to flesh out believability for this. It's also nice that enemies that are off screen don't fire bullets onto the screen.
Right.
Make you feel like you're being like, where the heck did that come from? So, at first I didn't think much of this, but when I took some thought, I thought, wow, that's really forward thinking. To have something where the bullets, something off the screen doesn't shoot at you, and doesn't hurt you, and then the ability where you're in control of a spot, but you can move left or right. So it doesn't feel you're just in this very narrow belt scrolling type maneuver. And it gives the world more of a... it feels lived in. More lived in.
Right.
Or in this case, maybe bombed in.
Yeah. Yeah. From what I gathered, there is a degree of bullet sealing in the game, but only when you're positioning your ship really close to a ground-based enemy, and usually only when you're beneath or basically on top of ground enemies. It doesn't take effect when the enemies are at your sides, evidenced by many incidents of sniper tanks taking me out, even though I was very close to them from the side. But it only appears to happen when you're directly beneath or on top of them. So it's definitely an early example of bullet sealing in the genre. I don't know if it's the first game to do it, but it's certainly an earlier game.
Yeah, one of the other things I know, speaking of getting close to things, I'm very thankful that this is a Toe Plan staple, is we don't have to worry about collisions with other planes of existence, right? You don't have to worry about running into buildings or trees or whatever have you. You just have your one plane, and you only have to worry about one set of direction, which I think really does this game a worthwhile service. Not having to worry about 3D objects or any other thing, the buildings or whatever you have to. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's certainly one of the things that I think makes vertical shoot 'em ups more attractive to some players is they don't have to contend with the scenery. So I totally understand that mindset and not having to focus on that as a element of the game. Speaking of Toe Plan, like a lot of the early Toe Plan games, when you've got a spread shot, you've got higher DPS when you're point blanking, particularly at full power. So, for example, even though the blue laser shot is more powerful than the red spread shot, if you're fully powered up and you're point blanking, you're still going to get higher DPS with that than you will with the blue laser shot. So definitely a carryover from the early Toaplan stuff as well. And I think we touched on this earlier, but the original Japanese arcade version has checkpoints, but the Western release will allow for instant respawns upon death. However, of course, when you're playing two-player, as long as one player is still on screen, the other player can continue to pump in quarters and or credits and keep going, and so you'll have respawn upon death for a two-player game.
Alright, so let's talk a little bit about the graphics. The graphics are generally pretty standard, but they definitely do the job. I mean, a lot of it, as we talked about earlier, was very... it feels very much like your standard military shooter. There's not so much to differentiate it from, let's say, something like Tiger Heli. Come earlier, but you can tell what stuff is, and I think the little touches that you see in stage 1 with the cows and the people running add a little bit more to make the world feel more fleshed out, more lived in. The colors are a little bit muted from what you get, and I think that there's one part, there's one, I can't remember if it's the Genesis version or if it's the TurboGrafx where the colors, no, it's the Jaguar version where the colors are brighter.
Oh, sure.
And that makes the game look different. But it still works well. It's not terrible, but it's not great either. It definitely does its job. The graphics are not the star of the show, which is definitely fine. I do like the explosions that you get here. I think this game has the best anime explosions outside of maybe Metal Storm. And I do like the effect that when your ship explodes, little pieces of shrapnel hit and can damage enemies. I thought that was a very nice touch.
Yeah, it is a nice touch. And I will say, I do think that the animations in the game are generally good. Including the explosions. So
yeah, I mean, they're not, I wouldn't call them serviceable because they're not, but they certainly aren't wow for wow's sake on there, and it's not something where someone's going, did you see that? In the arcade, when you're trying to grab everyone's attention with the latest and greatest and stuff, this feels a little bit muted. Not that it's bad being muted, but it doesn't have that draw factor to get you looking at the screen.
Yeah, but I remember seeing this game back in the day and being generally impressed by how it looked.
Well, don't get me wrong, I'm not calling it ugly, but at the same time, it's not a Ferrari either, so... It's not a Pinto, right. But it's definitely not a Ferrari. But it definitely works well with what it has. And I think that the graphics are one of the things that has certainly improved over time. I think that Raiden Fighters definitely does a better job with some of the graphics than... granted, this is a couple years later. But Raiden Fighters gives a little bit more vibrant color to it. Without going into pinata or rainbow territory, but still maintains that sort of down to earth militaristic aesthetic. So it's a good starting point for the graphics, and the animations are well done and definitely good, but you can definitely see where things were improved upon in the sequels.
Yeah. Just talking about the sound here briefly, the soundtrack to Raiden is pretty iconic. It was done by Akira Sato, and of course the Stage 1 theme, Gallantry, is definitely iconic among shmup music. And in fact, the version of Gallantry that we use for the intro music for the podcast is a pretty good example of why the soundtrack of this game has been so well loved over the years, and why, even though Akira Sato didn't compose music for any of the subsequent games, his themes just kept popping up in later games in different remixed forms, because there's just really good tracks.
Yeah, I have to say, Gallantry is a classic no matter which way you look at it. Everyone recognizes Gallantry. But outside of Gallantry, is there any specific tracks that stand out to you?
I mean,
That's the problem I have with this, is I can't think of anything outside of Gallantry that really speaks to me.
Right. I couldn't tell you the names of the other tracks, but I can hum them all when I'm playing the game, and I enjoy them all. So,
fair enough.
Much like a lot of the early Toa Plan game soundtracks, I just think the music is fitting, and it works well within the game, and it sort of has that more uplifting kind of vibe to it, like a Toa Plan game, where instead of just music that's trying to pump you up and get you amped to play the game, it has that more, I don't know, victorious kind of feel to it, so that you feel like you're not just flying into battle desperately, but it's more of a vibe of "I've got this" kind of
yeah.
thing going
It's very bombastic.
Yeah,
and yeah, I don't blame you, but I certainly like the soundtrack in here. But it sort of reminded me of the times that I would buy a CD just for a single song. And the rest of the stuff, while it was decent, it wasn't the reason why I wanted the album.
Oh,
and
sure.
to me, Gallantry is that song. So I get it. I mean, I think it's definitely, overall, it's a very good package. But most people come for Gallantry. And that is definitely the song. And I think you could probably say the same thing about some of the Gradia soundtrack, right? With their work, there's like one or two songs that everybody knows, and the rest of the stuff is stuff that only people who play the games over and over and over again would get excited about.
Right. Yeah, and in terms of the sound, it's kind of interesting, the dichotomy between the somewhat slight sound from your own fire, your own shots, and the very slight explosion sounds that you get from taking out popcorn enemies and stuff, and then the much more loud and booming explosion sounds that you get from destroying larger enemies, taking out bosses, dropping bombs, and some of the boss sound effects are a little bit more pronounced. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there. But I think it's good it works, because then it allows the music to be a little bit more prominent, and it makes it so that the sound effects don't become annoying.
Well, it certainly doesn't fall under what I refer to as the steel vampire effect, where everything sounds blown out, or everything's turned up to 10 on here, and it's just really hard to figure out what the heck is going on. It's mixed pretty well.
Right.
So, let's move on to scoring. Any target that you shoot and don't destroy right away will award tick points. Medals are worth 300 points when collected, and if you survive to the end of the stage and destroy the boss, you get an additional 100 points per medal. Now, if I remember correctly, the medals that you get throughout the stage, if you die at the boss, your medals for that entire stage points are wiped off, right?
Correct.
It goes up to the life. So Yeah, a lot of times you get to the end and then you'll die on the boss and that's it. So you have to get really good at making through the stage on one life.
Right.
Which isn't hard, but it's sort of... I don't know, it'd just be really frustrating if I got to the end, all of a sudden I got hit right at the very end and lost everything right before I kill, and the boss gets one shot and then the boss is dead. So...
Right.
Well, that's alright. That's the way the STG goes.
Yeah, and the way that it works too is that your bomb stock becomes a bit of a multiplier. So the number of medals that you end up with, assuming that you don't die during the stage or the boss, the number of medals that you end up with get multiplied by the number of bombs that you have, and then that times, I think, 1,000 points per medal. And so, for example, if you got 10 medals during the stage and then you ended the boss with 4 bombs, or you beat the boss with 4 bombs in stock, then you get a 40,000 point bonus at the end of the stage. So, even though you're given a decent amount of bombs in the game, and you should be using them to, in very hairy situations whenever you can, you're obviously incentivized from a scoring perspective to hold on to them.
Yeah, and that's the true power of Tex-Mexium. I mean, to get multiplies from scoring, beautiful. So, as we talked about earlier, the Miklis is worth 3,000 points. And something interesting that I just learned regarding the Miklis, it's a playable ship in Raiden Fighters 2.
Yes.
And the ferries are worth 10,000 points, both of which these we had discussed earlier are not calculated into the end of the stage score and are just added immediately to your overall score.
Right.
And power-ups when you're at max power are worth additional 5,000 points. The P full power-up is worth 10,000 points. And the stage 2 boss spawns enemies, so some milking is possible. The final boss does as well, though obviously that increases difficulty, so it's extremely risky. And heck, if you're trying to milk the final boss, you're much, 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 much better at Raiden than I could ever hope to be. Because that is hard.
Same.
So you get an additional 1 million points, bonus points for completing a loop, which is really difficult. And I think you should be given extra points just for making it to stage 6. This game is a lot longer than I expected it to be initially. Most of the STGs that we had played were, maybe an hour at most, but this game feels like it keeps going and going and going. So, and once you get to stage 6, you really have to know what the heck you're doing, or you're going to be inserting a whole roll of quarters before you know it.
Oh, yeah.
So now that we went over scoring and the graphics and the sound and everything else, what do you think about Raiden?
This is one of those games that I've long been a fan of, but I know that, as we've kind of discussed and hinted at several times, I know that it's very derivative, and it's well known at this point that the team who developed Raiden were highly influenced by Kyoku Tiger, or Twin Cobra from Toaplan, and that this game is very much a love letter to that kind of design. But I do think that there's enough in Raiden that is different from Q Tiger to sort of set it apart and make it so that it's not just a clone, but it sort of builds on some of those aspects. Kyoku Tiger didn't have a sub-weapon. It only had a primary weapon. And even though there were 4 different primary weapons that you could pick up, there were really only a couple of them that were useful. And the way that it's implemented is similar to Q Tiger, but again, it's the weapons are different enough that they set themselves apart to a degree. The scoring is a little bit more nuanced, and I think overall the graphical presentation is better. I mean, it's a couple of years later from Kyoku Tiger, but I definitely think that Seibu had a leg up on Toaplan in terms of their graphical design at that stage in the game. Toaplan would go on to create some really beautiful games in the 90s, but in terms of that shift from the 80s into the early 90s, Seibu definitely gave Toaplan a run for their money and made Toaplan have to up their game for subsequent releases. And I think the overall soundtrack presentation and just how solid the game was is really what cemented it as such a popular title and why it saw such great success. So it doesn't surprise me that this game was as successful as it actually was, because it just really is very solid.
Yeah, I think that was well said. I echo those sentiments that it took what had came before it, and it took the elements that were there and made a solid STG out of it. Is it doing something that is completely original? No, but what it does, it definitely does well, and it adds in just enough to add in a little something. Like I don't think we've seen too many where the ship is destroying the pieces, affect and take out the popcorn enemy or damage whatever's nearby. I think the biggest telling factor about this game has to be the number of ports. Heck, I don't think since the original Gradius that any STG has gotten this number of ports.
Right. Yeah, and of course, they're going to be a mixed bag. I mean, we haven't really gone into it very much, other than what you mentioned at the beginning, but some of the ports of this game are truly abysmal and are just not good. I mean, the Super Nintendo port from Micronix is terrible. It's not even really a port so much as a bit of a mild reimagining of the game, and it's just not good. The Sega Genesis port is good, but as you said, the colors are a little dull, and the soundtrack isn't quite up to snuff, but honestly, it's possibly the best thing that Micronet ever did. I don't care for the PC Engine or TurboGrafx version. I know there are some who do. But to me, it takes the base game and changes some things, and it actually makes it harder because it puts more enemies in there. And when you put more enemies in a vertically scrolling game that has been converted to 4:3 aspect ratio and you're not really given any more weapons or any more that you can use to contend with all that extra stuff, it just doesn't work for me. And even though the Super Raiden soundtrack is good, I don't think it does enough to
offset the other changes in gameplay. Yeah, I agree there. The other thing that I wish or would like to see is maybe not so much like a remaster in some ways, but more to get something like this to get the M2 treatment. I would love to see different variations upon the soundtrack. I know that we've got a couple, of course, the Super Raiden, and I think the Raiden project for the PlayStation has at least one soundtrack variation. So it will be interesting for M2 to do a collection on this. That would be nice. Same way that they did with the Leste.
Right.
And here I will be interested to see what they could do with this in order to it's in here. And in that regard too, maybe throw in Raiden Fighters. It seems a little bit of a shame now that Raiden Fighters is locked behind the 360 curtain, as it were. And that collection is about the only way I can think that you can play those games, and it's certainly not getting cheaper.
Yeah. I mean, they're on the Raiden Legacy, but that's not great.
That was the .emu one, right?
Yeah.
So funny to think of all the stuff that .emu has done since then. They published Shredder's Revenge, and they published Streets of Rage 4. Come on now, show some more STG love.
Yeah.
Yeah, overall, I think that people who either do the arcade archives, or if you're looking to play the PlayStation version, would be your best bet. The other versions are curiosities and aren't really indicative of the spirit of the original vision.
Right. With the possible exception, I would say, of the Genesis version, because it is as arcade accurate as you're going to get from that time period, and honestly is a pretty good effort.
I would say that probably about the FM Downs before I said the Genesis, but that would just be me.
True, but the Genesis version is more accessible.
Oh, fuck. What you have to do is fly to Japan, buy this computer, buy the software, and then you can play it.
Right.
It's accessible, see? Just as accessible as playing any game on the Sharp X68000.
Right.
No, I totally get that. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to play. I would definitely go back and play Raiden, but it wouldn't be probably the one that I would fire up. I think that I would probably play Raiden Fighters Jet, or maybe even Raiden 4. I don't have much experience with Raiden 3. I can't say there, but I would probably do 4 or Jet before I did any, or maybe even Raiden 2, before I did anything with Raiden 1.
Right. And I think that's, pretty common. When I was spending a lot of time with the Raiden project on PS1 back in the day, I split my time between Raiden and Raiden 2, but I would say I probably spent a good bit more time with Raiden 2 than I did the original, in part because of the toothpaste laser, but also in part because maybe the game felt slightly more approachable and just a bit more polished.
Yeah, and they've also had more time to refine the concepts, right? The first version is for the most part not as good as the sequel. The sequel takes whatever was built good in the original and then builds upon it, right? So most of the time they do a better job at building upon it. Not always, but
right.
Yeah, and the same holds true. I think there are some exceptions where maybe the original is a little bit better. You could argue that maybe R-Type 2 is not as good as R-Type 1. And there, that's so decisive or divisive that it could go either way. But the foundation for the original R-Type is just so strong, I think the R-Type 2 would be hard-pressed to beat it. Yeah, that's just my opinion.
Sure. Well, now that we've given our thoughts, let's hear from the RF Generation community. First up, we've got Corkman, who said, I'm in this month. I'll probably go between the PS1 version and the Genesis version. I'll have to compare them, but the PS1 version seems pretty close to the arcade. I forgot how much this game allows you to scroll left or right. I've been playing Twin Cobra and Fireshock recently, and those games don't let you scroll as far laterally. It's cool because it makes the game feel bigger and allows you more room to not get cornered. But sometimes you scroll left or right into the firing range of an unseen tank. The Genesis version seems to be easier than the PS1 version on normal difficulty. And he notes here, don't forget to go to the options menu for normal difficulty, it defaults to easy. There doesn't seem to be as many enemies, and maybe the bullets are slower. It doesn't allow you to scroll left or right as much, so it's a little of a smaller playing field. The scoring will not be as high in the Genesis version. I've gotten to about the same spot on Stage 3 on both versions, with just about the same number of bonuses. I got 320,000 on PS1 and 258,000 on the Genesis version. And then later in the thread, he said, I had a strange glitch when playing Ride and Tread on the Genesis. Halfway through the game, all the enemies disappeared. The bosses, too. You can see in the attached picture that he posted on the forum that the first boss didn't appear, and the panel that comes from wasn't there either. Just a black square. I could move and bomb normally the whole time. The game scrolled up a little from where the bosses are and then stopped. I could still move and shoot, but couldn't get Stage 2 to start. Very strange. Yeah, I've never seen that glitch before, but I thought that was interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, it's certainly a unique glitch.
Yeah.
Alright, our next comment comes to us from Geriatric Damaku. Hello players, I'm in. Real competition requires somebody to finish last. I played for a few hours so far on MAME, looking to watch for strats and get much better. Usually in a MAME ROM set collection, the top listed version is the most official, but if anyone has recon that one of the other versions is the most official or accepted for competition, I could switch to it. Final thoughts, Raiden is too old school. Bombs take effect about half a second after they're fired. Sniper tanks aim straight for you. Baddies shoot you in the backside from behind. All classic shmup tropes. But I've reached my limit for a while, and it's been a few years since I picked up Raiden Fighters. Will it be as murderous? Probably more so. You're a glutton for punishment, Mr. Geriatric Damaku.
Yeah, and he brings up a good point that that we failed to mention earlier, but yeah, you can't really panic bomb in this game because there is a short window of activation between when you hit the bomb button and when it explodes. And according to what Cream said on the STG Weekly episode, there are instances where the bomb is going off, an enemy will be in the path of the bomb and won't get destroyed right away. So if you are in the path of the bomb, you can still collide with an enemy or a bullet before the bomb finishes taking that bullet out. So it's still possible to die even after you've bombed.
I wonder if the bomb delay, we can coin a term here, bomb lag.
Bomb lag, yeah, there you go.
This game's got too much bomb lag. I can't play it.
Alright, Faux Macho said, I'm in on this. So far, my score is 332,970, getting to Stage 1-3 on the Japanese Arcade Archives release on PS5.
I don't believe that at all. No way. There's no such thing as a PS5.
I've been doing single runs, but as I've grown a bit tired of the first stage, I should start credit feeding to get more time in on the later stages. My favorite part so far is upon death. The score continues to climb a bit, and that's because of the aforementioned shrapnel effect when you die. Really helps lessen the defeat, which usually hurts because the deaths come fast in this game. And then Faux Macho offered some final thoughts later on. I definitely warmed up to this game over the month. The first level was getting quite dull when I wasn't improving much in Stage 2. I found the bomb delay was just short enough to be tolerable. If I knew a certain bullet pattern was coming, I could still use it for self-defense. Any longer, and it would have been useless for anything except faster damage strategies against the stronger enemies and bosses. I started as the red jet on the Japanese version, and eventually moved over to the blue jet on the international version. I like the international version more, which has instant spawns instead of restarting at checkpoints. It keeps the momentum up, and runs feel more enjoyable to me. But the ferry assist is more generous in the Japanese version. My best score was 603,370, international two-player, as you say, which I think ended in Stage 4. Happy to get above 500k, which was the last PSN trophy I needed to get. Excited to play more Raiden games and get a feel for the series as a whole.
Excellent. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I know we did, and thank you for joining us. Our next comment comes to us from Zoido. Thank you again for joining us last time. It was great to have you. It says, started my Summer of Raiden a bit late, but I played some runs last Saturday. Can't believe I made it to Stage 2. I mean, it sounds sort of weird, someone saying Stage 2, but in this game, Stage 2 is definitely an accomplishment. Final thoughts. Despite the checkpoint system, floating power-ups, sniper tanks straight from Toplan Hill, and a ship that always feels too tiny and a bit slow for me, I can see why the original Raiden and as the series was so popular. It's not necessarily one of my favorite shmups, but I love the soundtrack, which is, in my opinion, one of the best for classic shmup soundtracks. Definitely with that gallantry on there. I mean, just even the first couple of notes, and then people just start humming along. I wonder if that happened in there. If you ever make it out to Shmup Slam, whatever the number is, 15 maybe, by next year. But if you make it out to Shmup Slam, I wonder if you just start humming the first couple of notes of gallantry, if people would just start joining along.
That'd be great. Let's see if we can lead a chorus of folks. Da na na na, da na 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 na.
You know, people sing Christmas songs just randomly, and people start joining in. There you go, gallantry.
Yes. Excuse me, do you have time to talk about our Lord and Savior Seibu Kaihatsu?
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Forget your loom button. There you go.
Exactly. Yes. Or t-shirts that say, Shmups, ask me how.
How about another shirt says 1cc? Ask me how.
There you go. Up next we have D Tungsten. Sorry, I don't have or make the time to do more in-depth takes on these, but MetalFRO really wanted my take, as I have no memory of this game from back in the day. My first impression is that the landscapes with the houses reminds me a little of Tiger Heli, a game I do remember from back in the day. I noticed the floating back and forth power-ups that cycle through the options, which reminds me of Battle Squadron, as a game that did that too. I'm aware of it being in other games, but can't remember which ones off the top of my head. The gameplay is solid, and the graphics are nice and pretty to look at even today. I don't feel like any aspects are too derivative, nor do I know specifically what aspects were originally in this game and used in other places. It's quite simple and straightforward compared to many later games with complex mechanics and scoring, but that's not a bad thing. Like most shooters, this game is difficult. The bombed-out overpasses became a joke on stream because they vaguely resemble Chicago infrastructure, fortunately not in the bombed aspect. Yeah. The PS1 version of the game plays great on the Mister, and is probably the best version with the possible exception of the Arcade Archives version or a real arcade, neither of which I played this month. Shout out to MetalFRO for meeting me at Galloping Ghost during the Summer of Raiden, even though we played Darius 1 and 2 together there. Yes, we did. That was a great time. Final score, 10 out of 10 for the cows. Except for the Super Nintendo version, 0 out of 10, no cows.
Just credit to you for trying the Super Nintendo version. That deserves some recognition.
Yeah, the Super Nintendo version, I feel like it could be reasonably beatable if you kind of got a feel for the cadence of the game. But it's just not good.
Well, the Super Nintendo version, it doesn't hit, there's no redeemable qualities. The artwork is bland, the gameplay is bland, the soundtrack is bland, the graphics are bland. I mean, there's no... Even with looking at... there's no guy playing a banjo on it. There's like nothing in here that is unique or draws somebody to it. It's just there.
Yeah.
You know, it's sort of... doesn't invite disgust, but at the same time, it doesn't draw people to it. It's like a bowl full of lime jello.
Right.
No one's gonna go, well, maybe I should eat that, or no one's gonna go, ooh, that looks appetizing, and it just sits there. Anyway, our next comment comes to us from my favorite new username here, Schlarp. It says, recap on Raiden 1. I had lots of fun, but it wore off in a bit. In the beginning, I was really eager to learn level by level without getting hit, but soon noticed that I'll never get close to 1cc. Well, it's a hard game. I'm right there with you. I made it to the last level with save states, and I just want to see the end, but still aim to reach level 3 with 1 credit. Looking forward for Raiden Fighters, though. Yeah, Raiden Fighters, I think, is where we're going to pick up a lot of steam. I'm definitely enjoying that. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of Raiden, Seibu Kaihatsu's take on Strikers. As weird as I know, it's a little backwards, but I see a lot of parallels there. It doesn't have a flying pancake, unfortunately, but it does have a dragon.
Yes.
I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but Squoosh. Been playing Raiden as part of the RF Generation Summer of Raiden run by Game Boy Guru. This game is truly kicking my butt, but managed to get through to the end of Stage 3 in one piece, only 5 more to go. Well, congratulations. Getting to the end of Stage 3 in 1cc is still quite an accomplishment. I think at most I managed to get to like Stage 2.5 halfway through before I got my butt kicked, so kudos to you, sir.
Yeah. And SPM tweeted a bunch about the game over the course of the month, and so I'll just share some of the tweets here. And SPM is at SPM_NSW on Twitter. And most of these included video as well, which is nice to see. Raiden's 5th boss has a nice, simple flow to it, but man was I tense at the end. There's no way I won't bomb that on an actual run. The hitbox is scary. In fact, I'll bomb everything I can. This game deserves it. And then a later tweet, Raiden's 6th boss is actually fun. It was pissing me off, but there's a way. Lowering their health until both heads flicker fast to kill them at once. It isn't necessary, though. I didn't know there was an intended exploit with extra asteroids. Nice touch. And then later, this was my best run so far, and thought I had finally got the first 4 bosses down. Next run, I died on the 3rd and 4th. This game is a mystery to me. I keep finding new ways to die. And then later on, Raiden's butt-clenching Stage 7. Finally made it through in one piece. Only once, though. I may end up going for the 1cc after all. And then a little later on, Raiden's 7th boss complete. I was laughing hysterically with his lucky dodges, which are in the video that SPM included in the tweet. Reaching this point underpowered was unexpected. I had always destroyed those panels before they attached to the boss. A second time no missing up to Stage 7, only to lose it all here. And SPM did actually manage to clear the game, tweeted about Raiden 2 and Raiden DX, and then dropped a link to the 1cc itself. But in the tweet, SPM said, Raiden DX is awesome. Gameplay first impressions, presentation's good, timed medals and hidden structures, lots of content. How on earth are you supposed to pick up the same power-ups after dying without grabbing others? And I'm gonna die a lot due to number 3. So, SPM tweeted out, I'm becoming a bit of a Raiden addict, or a Raiden fan. So I was glad to see that through this process we were able to introduce the game to a couple of folks who honestly didn't have experience with it, despite how prolific it was back in the day. And many kudos to SPM for, in the course of less than a month, managing to learn and clear the game on the first loop.
A medito to you, sir.
Yeah. So that brings us to high scores.
What? You don't have the high score, neither does Zoido? Amazing.
Well, I have one of them. Yeah, so in the arcade version, as I said, SPM managed to clear. After the first loop, it was a score of 2,912,250. And then SPM's run ended in 2-2 with a final score of 3,073,120 points. Fomacho came in second with 603,370. Corkman was at 326,900, playing on PS1, and Geriatric Danmaku at 210,490 points. On the Genesis side, we had 3 scores posted for that. I ended up taking the top spot there with 588,000 points even. Corkman came in next with 352,550, and Zoido with 345,600 points. And I didn't mention it before, but shout out to Corkman for again joining me on Fightcade for a two-player stream so that we could try the game out 2-player.
Very nice. So, final thoughts here by Jack Andy. Sorry.
I played Raiden today. It was a good game. No.
Final thoughts here.
I think this is a game that, not to be a little bit too on the nose because of the whole Raiden legacy thing, but I think Raiden has a legacy. And despite the fact that Raiden began life as a game that perhaps aped its source material or its inspirations a little bit too closely, I do think that it is greater than the sum of its parts. Perhaps not by a wide margin, but enough to be recognized as a classic and as an influence on the development of the genre, and certainly as one of the games that has had more lasting appeal than a lot of other shoot-'em-ups from this era. Because certainly, when you talk about shooting games now to people who are not immersed in the scene as we are, people still remember stuff like Gradius. People still remember R-Type. People generally can still name a few of the big games that they might have played as kids. And certainly, Raiden is among those. Not only because of how prolific it was everywhere, but the sheer number of console ports and coverage the game got. It was everywhere for a little while, prior to Street Fighter II kind of taking over the arcade and relegating shooting games to also-ran status for a little while. And so I think it's a game that, while the development team certainly improved upon it with subsequent games, I do still think it's worth going back to, and certainly worth looking at the roots of this series, and also kind of seeing that interesting juxtaposition of really familiar elements that they obviously plagiarized from Toaplan, while also combining a few new things and tweaks of their own, just enough to sort of allow Raiden to stand on its own.
Yeah, well said. I mean, it certainly is derivative, but it's with the parts that they did ape, they aped very well, and it's stood on its own and has been ported so many times because it was a quality product. I mean, you take what works, and then you add in a couple new features, which is a very sound way of doing things. It's not going to be revolutionary, but it's not going to be a flash in the pan either. You look at something such as maybe the method that we use for Vector Man and Donkey Kong Country and the way that they did graphics, where they would make sprites out of CG renders, and that hasn't necessarily aged so well in here, where if you go back to Raiden, you could jump right in and still get it. It may not be modern or have the best play that you would get out of something such as, say, maybe Raiden 4, but it's certainly, I don't want to use the word serviceable, but it's certainly has enough in it to earn itself as a classic. It has established itself as a mile marker within the STG roadmap. It may not be a tentpole like the original Gradius is, or Space Invaders, but it certainly it is a mile marker and something that, even as we've proven within this month's playthrough, that people can go back to and try it out and find enjoyment out of.
Yeah, a solid foundation for better things to come.
A solid foundation for future excellence. I know it sounds like a bad school motto, or cliched school motto, but it works here.
Yeah.
So, as we record this, we are post 4th of July and into full swing for Raiden Fighters, the original Raiden Fighters, which came on the arcade, was ported to the 360, PC, and mobile. I'm playing the 360 port and enjoying it quite a bit. I like the Strikers-esque ability to choose between the different planes and get different speed and defense and response, as well as different versions of the toothpaste laser. And it seems to be working out pretty well. And in August, we're going to playing Raiden 4 with arcade, 360, PS3, PC, and Switch. Now, does Mikado count for this? I think it does via Switch, but...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Raiden 4 Cross Mikado, since that came out on Switch, will definitely be viable, mostly because it's essentially just Raiden 4 Overkill with some additional features and the Mikado alternate soundtrack included.
Alright. So I'd like to shout out Ed of Studio Mudprints / Bullet Heaven. Well, I guess at this point now it's just Studio Mudprints, right? For the logo.
Right.
And then mention that he also did the logo, which shows up on the podcast shirts, which I'm going to try and get myself a podcast pillow, so to speak, for the couch. I think that would be a good starting point.
Nice.
I'd like to thank Kogasu for the intro and outro music, which, as we mentioned earlier, is Gallantry. I'd like to thank everyone at the RF Gen Playcast and the RF Gen Collector Cast. That's technically, that should be changed to the RF Generation Concert Cast and the RF Generation Souls Cast.
Right.
And I'd like to thank the Parrot Pirate Dog, and for streaming the Game of the Month and making things interesting.
Yeah, I'm trying. My skills are not as good as I would like them to be, but I just keep trying.
That's okay. That's what you got to do on here.
Yep.
You know, you can't expect to that if you're not a prodigy to instantly quit. That's just not how it works. You got to put in the time.
Yeah.
Or to get good.
Well, that's what I'm doing.
Yep. Maybe we should just get you some Red Bull. You think? You think if you knock back a couple Red Bulls, it would help?
Probably not.
Red Bull and vodka?
No, that would definitely impair my schmupping ability.
Oh. I was thinking maybe we just get you a picture of a lady holding a knife cutting a giant lemon.
Oh, yes. Yeah, like the Antarium arcade.
Yeah, we met up at a arcade last month, and that was the most prominent feature about the arcade was a lady holding a knife lemon. I don't know if that was meant to draw out some inner powers on there, or what Namco was thinking, but maybe it was originally Pac-Man, and they just couldn't do it, so they just threw in a lemon instead. They smudged it so they wouldn't get copyright infringement.
Who knows?
Well, thank you everybody for listening, and thank you everybody who joined us participation. We really appreciate you celebrating the Summer of Raiden with us, and look forward to playing more shmups in the future.
Thanks, you everybody.